All right, hey everyone, welcome back. Today we are going deep on something I think really fascinating. Have you ever heard of Cold War Gothic?
Cold War Gothic.
Yeah. So get this, we've got this excerpt, and it's talking about how, all that tension, all that anxiety from the Cold War,
Yeah.
it basically breathed new life into, classic Gothic themes.
Oh, interesting. So less like haunted houses and vampires.
Exactly. More like, the fear that the real monster is, right next door.
No, no.
Yeah, hiding in plain sight.
Yeah, I can see that. The Cold War was definitely a time of suspicion and paranoia. Like
Uh-huh.
everyone was looking over their shoulder, right?
Totally. So this excerpt really digs into how those anxieties, about nuclear war and communist infiltration, how that stuff didn't just stay on the front page of the newspaper. It really got under people's skin.
Right. It became part of the culture. And you can see that reflected in a lot of the art and literature from that period, can't you?
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just like subtle hints either. It's front and center in some really iconic works of sci-fi and horror. I mean, think about the Twilight Zone.
Oh, yeah. Classic Twilight Zone.
Right. Like even today, those episodes can still give you the creeps. And a lot of them play on those Cold War fears in a really effective way.
For sure. There's that, what's it called? The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street.
Oh, yes. The monsters are due on Maple Street. That's a perfect example of Cold War Gothic. What do you think it is about that episode that just makes it, it hits so hard?
Well, it's tapping into that very primal fear of the unknown, right? But instead of like a creepy old house or a monster lurking in the shadows, the monster is anyone. It could be your neighbor, your friend, even your family.
It's that fear that the enemy is already inside the gates, right?
Exactly. And it plays on the suspicion and distrust that were so prevalent during the Cold War. Like everyone is potentially the other. It pushes that idea to the point where society actually starts to unravel.
Wow. That's chilling. And that whole breakdown of society thing,
Mm.
the loss of trust, isn't that like a classic Gothic trope too?
Oh, absolutely. Think about all those Gothic novels with crumbling castles and isolated communities. That sense of isolation and paranoia is key. It's like they took that core element of Gothic literature and just transplanted it into this modern Cold War setting.
Yeah, like updating the monster for the atomic age.
You got it. So
Yeah.
instead of vampires and werewolves, now we have these unseen internal threats that are even more terrifying because they're so intangible. It's like, how do you fight something you can't even see?
Right, and that feeling, and that must have been how people felt about the threat of nuclear war. Just this constant dread of annihilation, just waiting for the bomb to drop.
Exactly. That constant dread, that fear of a force so powerful it could wipe out civilization in an instant. It totally mirrors that Gothic notion of an all-encompassing, inescapable threat. And, it's really interesting that Invasion of the Body Snatchers came out in 1956, like right in the middle of all of that.
Oh, wow, I didn't even think about that. But it makes total sense.
Right. I mean, you've got this alien invasion, but the aliens are taking over people's bodies and minds. You can't tell who's who.
Ugh, it's creepy. And it's not just the fear of the unknown, right? It's that fear of losing yourself, of being replaced by something that looks like you but isn't. It really taps into those anxieties about communist infiltration and enforced conformity.
Precisely. And that idea of the other, it's so central to Gothic literature. It's always about something outside of us, outside of what's normal, threatening to break in. But during the Cold War, that other wasn't a supernatural being. It was the perceived enemy, the communist infiltrator hiding in plain sight.
Wow, so it's like the Gothic, it's not just about, spooky castles and graveyards, is it? It's really about tapping into whatever those deepest societal anxieties happen to be at the time. It's like this reflection.
That's a great way to put it. It's a genre that constantly adapts and evolves, reflecting the fears and anxieties of each era. It's what keeps it relevant, keeps it scary. So, like we were saying, the Cold War gave us Cold War Gothic with its fears of nuclear war and communist infiltration. But then, what about today?
Oh, yeah. What about today?
Right. Like, what anxieties do you think are driving the horror and sci-fi we're seeing now, What are the modern castles and unseen threats that populate your favorite movies and TV shows? Think about it.
Yeah, whoa. What are the monsters in our closets now? That is definitely something to think about. All right, that is all the time we have for our deep dive today. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.